I love to come back and talk to students about real estate and about apartment looking. And the reason I gave you these questions about apartments is because I think there are some things on here that people never think of. Because I used to have students come back to me after they'd been in an apartment, or even when they were professionals and out looking for apartments, and they didn't even ask the right questions. They just went in and they thought they liked the kitchen, you know, and they didn't make any sense about what to look for. So these are the questions. You should have this kind of a checklist, whether you're looking for a student apartment or whether you're looking for an apartment as a new professional. I had one student who was looking for an apartment when she was going to a job in the Chicago area. And she said something like she was going to spend $600 a month. And I said, no, you aren't. You're not going to find anything for $600 a month that wouldn't be too scary. And you need to think about different things if you're going to Chicago than if you're going to stay in Charleston. I also had a person who came to Charleston and said she wanted to have a place where there was a doorman. And I said, oh honey, we don't have doormen in Charleston. Some apartments don't even have an exterior door, much less a doorman. So it's very geographic. You must think about where you're going, and if you're getting a job, the amount of money you're going to make is directly related to the cost of housing in that area. And I would think in the Chicago area, you're going to be spending in excess of $1,000 a month. And that won't get you much. I have a young friend who lives in New York City in a studio, and the last I heard, he was paying $2,500 a month. So your salary must be relevant to that, or you can't afford to live there. You just can't. And he doesn't have a car, because when you live in the city, a car is really a burden, and sometimes if you have one and you want a place to put it, it could cost a couple of $100s a month just for a place to put it. And when my son lived in the Wrigleyville area, on game days you couldn't park on the street. It was against the rules. You had to find a place to get your car out of the way so they could have game traffic parked on the street. Ask those questions. Because if you have a car, you can't just fold it up and put it in your pocket. You have to find a place. And an apartment with a parking place is very difficult to find. And sometimes the parking place, if it's behind the apartment building, it is so hard to get to, or it's a scary way to get to it. So I kind of wanted to just go over these questions with you to see what you thought. So obviously, the cost per month and the security deposit are very important. And don't plan on getting the security deposit back unless you leave that apartment in spectacular condition. Most landlords do not return the whole thing, just for your information. The term of the lease, and when does it start and end? A lease is a legal document. Don't ever forget it. It's not just something you sign. It is a legal document. And if you just up and leave, or say you're not going to be there anymore, or you've lost your job, that is not the landlord's fault. You signed the legal document. Now, are you aware that on campus, though, we have an office where if you're having difficulties with your lease, you can go to get help? The last I knew, it was in the top level of the other part of the union, and you could go there if you were having trouble. Like, let's say I had somebody once who said their furnace didn't work. Well, that's not habitable in Illinois. You have to have a furnace that works. So there is a place here, but you probably won't have that when you're out as a new professional. Are you responsible for anyone other than yourself? Here you go. like, when you sign a lease, do each of you sign a lease, or do two people sign the same lease? Particularly if two people sign the same lease, if your roommate runs away from home, you're responsible for the whole deal. So you want to be sure when you sign that piece of paper what's going on. Is it just for you, or is it, is each person responsible whether the other person's there or not, is what I'm trying to say. That's something people don't always understand. Who pays the utilities and how much are they? Sometimes people pay for trash pickup. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they pay for water. In Chicago, often the water is included because water is less expensive in the Chicago area than it is some places. And so in a big building, sometimes it's just part of the rent, but not usually here. Is there adequate parking for you and your guests? If you have a guest come, what do they do? Is it free? Does it cost money? How far is it to where you need to go every day? What appliances and furniture are included? If they are there, is it okay if you move them? Not always. They don't want you to put them in storage somewhere. They want you to use those. Where would you go to do laundry? If it's available on site, how much does it cost? I know my grandchildren who've been in college, they don't like to do laundry in the apartment building because it's very expensive. It's about $2 a load sometimes, and you can spend $20 before you even get started if you've got a few loads to wash and to dry. So you may want to know that question. Do the windows open, and are there screens? We all need to think about screens because we're having this news scare about mosquitoes and the diseases that they're carrying and that. So you don't want windows without screens. And you'll take this with you and check them off as you're looking. You need to make several copies of this when you're looking. Is there air conditioning, and what type of heat do you have? Can you control it? In some big buildings, the heat all comes from one source. Sometimes you have it within your own apartment. I think the next one is very important because it tells you a lot about the maintenance of the building. How do the halls, stairwells, the exterior, and the mailboxes look? If the mailboxes are all rusty and hanging on by one nail, something's wrong with this picture. That is a big indicator of the maintenance that apartment building will have. Will the locks be changed? I would insist on it, absolutely insist on it. So how secure is the building? The next one is real funny, but it's a good one. Are there bird droppings on the windowsills indicating that the pigeons will drive you nuts? That's a big one, especially in the city. They can just send you over the edge because they come there, and especially if you are so silly as to feed them. Is the storage adequate for groceries and clothes? And then, you need another place to put stuff. Christmas decorations, a piece of luggage, whatever you've got to store. And the next one's important too. If you put a dollar bill in the refrigerator door, does it pull out easily? If it pulls out easily, that refrigerator is not going to stay cold. And it means the door doesn't have a good rubber closure around it that will keep the cold in and the heat out. Don't be afraid to try these things. It's smart business. Do the range burners and the oven work? I bet all of you, if you've ever rented an apartment, didn't even bother with either one of those things. You didn't care. And maybe the burners don't work at all. And maybe the oven doesn't work at all. How's the water pressure at the sinks and in the shower? Does the toilet flush? That's a really important factor. Some places they don't do that. And what about electrical outlets, circuits, and light sources? Especially in today's world with all the technology we all use, it's very important to know how good the electric outlets are and whether or not there's going to be surges there that might affect your computers and other pieces of equipment. do the windows have blinds or curtains? And if they don't, can you put up your own? Some places they don't want you putting up anything of your own. And my daughter lived in an apartment building in one of the suburban Chicago areas where the curtains all had to look white from the outside. They didn't want the apartment building to look all weird with some orange and blue and green and yellow curtains. They wanted everything to have a white background. Read your lease. Again, most people didn't pay any attention. And can you paint? And if you do paint, are there restrictions on colors? My son always wanted to paint, but then he always had to change the colors back to white. So you want to know if you want that expense or not. So I'm just saying, keep this list, make more of them when you go apartment looking, and you may think of other things that are important to you. Some of you could care less about how much cooking space there is, and some of you would be very interested in that. You know, it depends if you like to cook or if you mostly are a microwave person or an eater-outer. So. Because some kitchens are totally inadequate. I mean, they're just awful. And they're dirty. The stove is just unbelievably dirty. And you wouldn't even want to do it. If you go in the kitchen and you see a lot of bugs running around, just leave. You don't want to go there. But that's another question you might want to ask. Is there routine extermination once a month or every so often? Because if you get a lot of roaches and ants and all kinds of things, if they don't do it in the whole building, it won't help if you try to control it, because they'll just come to your place. And one time my son moved out and I went to help him clean up, and I knew that we had cleaned out the apartment, and the landlord said he wasn't giving him back his security deposit because there were fleas from the dog he had. So I called the landlord and I said, number one, he didn't have a dog. Number two, I helped clean that apartment. It was okay. And the landlord said, oh, must have been the one next door. Ask questions. Don't just give in. I would always clean up and get my security deposit back if I were you. I just think that's good sense. It's also good if you ever want to use that landlord as a reference for another one. If you leave a mess, even if your security deposit covers it, you are not going to get a good recommendation. And believe me, most people today want a recommendation before they rent to you. They want to know if you paid your rent. They want to know if you kept the place clean. Did you lie to them about how many people were there? Did you take out the trash? All those things. So, do you have any questions or comments about that? Any of you had any experience that you want to share?
Definitely look into, like, really think about how you function in an apartment before you, like, jump into it. Like, I love my apartment, but I really love my bedroom, and then I have my washer and dryer, but my kitchen is awful. Like, it's a kitchen, living room, dining room, so, like, my fridge is right next to my sofa, so, like, I can just reach in and grab something. Like, it's actually not that fabulous.
Well, you do need to kind of visualize yourself in there as you would live there, because it's going to look different when you get there than it does when you go to look at it, because everybody's lifestyle is a little different.
Yeah, and I don't really have like a 2 by 2 foot counter space. It's just a corner space. Otherwise, it's just sink. So like I have to like use my cutting board as a table in my sink. Like it's awful. Like, and I love cooking.
But now you know.
Yeah, I learned a lot in this apartment.
You learn a lot after you have one.
Is it typical for landlords to like deep clean the carpets before new tenants move in? Because I know like in the apartment I rented through Eastern, they do that, but it comes out of your security deposit. So I know like my landlord will deep clean our carpets before someone else moves in, but is that typical?
It just varies all over the place. And sometimes things will be done if you ask for them to be done. They may say, well, they don't care if the carpet's clean, I don't care. But that's a question I would ask, because sometimes, especially if there have been pets, you would want that. And I think allergies play a big part here too. Many people have allergies that they need to consider when they rent an apartment. You might be better off with one with no carpet and all vinyl or hardwood floors, because it would be a big issue for you.
Yeah, especially if you like to walk around barefoot, because like so many oils escape your feet. They ask you to the apartment, and like people live there and they walked around barefoot. And,
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking about, like, we're roommates and we work out in our living room, so like, it's not the cleanest, so I would want the next people that move in there to know that the carpets are clean, because we use that room a lot, so.
And see, what I think is, it's really great to have an apartment at least for a while when you're a student, because you learn so much. So when you go to do your next thing, you have a little better idea of what really counts for you. It's not the same for everybody. Anything else you want to say? Well, let's look at these steps in home buying. You may not be doing that soon, but you might want to do it someday. The laws in Illinois, at least, have changed in the last year. And banks are saying to us, don't send us anybody to get a loan that we haven't seen previously to give them a pre-approval. And what that means is, they don't want to mess with you if you didn't bother getting a pre-approval letter from them before. Because you can't just buy any house you want to. You have to buy a house that's in your price range. And I've had people call me at the real estate office and want to go see a house. And I would say, have you been to your favorite bank to get pre-approved? They said, I don't want to buy it, I just want to see it. Well, now wait a minute. We don't want to take you to see a house just for fun, because maybe a young mom lived there with twins and a dog. She has to get out of the house for you to come see it, and all you're doing is being nosy. There really is a reason to do all this, because you need to think about the feelings and the convenience of the person who lives there now, and you need to think about the person who's going to show you the house. We don't get any money for showing people houses. We get money for helping people buy houses. There is a difference. That doesn't mean you shouldn't look at several houses before you buy. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, know what you can afford before you start really looking. And if you want to get an idea about the home prices in any area, if you're going into an area or even apartments, go to Realtor.com. It's the best website. You can just click on where you want to be and how many bedrooms you need, and it'll show you what's available and how much. It could very well determine whether or not you would decide to go to an area, because you would know based on what you were being offered as a salary whether or not you could afford to live there. I have some friends that are moving from here to Hartford, Connecticut, Amherst, Massachusetts area. Real estate there is just sky high, just sky high. They are paying $300,000 for a very small 2-bedroom house. And if you've ever watched HGTV,
300,000?
what?
You said 300,000?
I did. Yeah, which you could probably buy for $100,000 here. And if you've ever watched HGTV, either on the West Coast or the East Coast, it just costs so much to live, so much. I mean, I see them looking at houses that are $700,000 or $800,000, and I don't know who makes that kind of money. And sometimes they look like very young people. They must have dynamite jobs. That's all I can say. Because to afford a house like that, you would have to be making probably at least $200,000 a year, at least. So housing should affect what you expect to get paid, or the other way around. You can't just live in a tent. You have to live somewhere. So that's a big deal. So anyway, it's not hard to get a written pre-approval from your bank, unless you're a ninny, unless you have really bad credit, unless you don't have any income. I mean, you do have to have all that. They will check it. Then you will also have to have at least $500 in cash or 1% of what you're buying. So if you're buying a $300,000 house, you would have to have at least $3,000 in earnest money. And some places they want you to have 10% up front. That's kind of scary, isn't it? I mean, that's a lot of money even for a little house. So then, you know, you kind of got to get those two things in your head. Then you begin to look at these other things. I just listed some to decide what's the most important thing to you. You know, do you just have to have a fenced yard because you've got this cute little dog, or do you really care if you have a yard at all to take care of? How close do you want to be to work? Or is it important that you could walk or get there by public transportation, or is that a problem for you? So any of these things, and you may think of other things. You know, the kitchen I put on here because for some people the kitchen's very important. Other people say, I don't need a kitchen, I only ever microwave stuff. It's just not an issue for some people, but it is for others. Then do your searching by driving around and looking on Realtor.com and ask to view some insides. Now typically people would look at 5 or 6 places before they would make a decision, and that could be a condo, it could be a house, it could be a half of a, you know, a duplex. But it's also very difficult if you want to look at 40. And sometimes people do want to look at 40 houses. That's hard to figure out, very hard. And in a metropolitan area, it's even harder because it takes you longer to get from one to another. In Charleston, it's not as hard because you can get almost any place in Charleston in 5 minutes. So you can look maybe at 3 an hour, you know, 15 minutes, 5 minutes to get there, 15 minutes, 5 minutes to get there. But in the suburban area of Chicago where my daughter lives, oh my, it could take you 45 minutes to get there. So it could take you all day to look at a few houses. And everybody gets grouchy after that. They get hungry and they get grouchy. And if there are children, it's the most horrible thing in the world for children to have to look at houses. Can you imagine how much a 3-year-old hates to go around looking at houses? And I've had some really different experiences with children, and I always thought some of that training I had in child development was useful. Because sometimes people have religious holidays that involve fasting. I had one family that was with me, and the little boy was about 3, and he was just racing from room to room. He was turning on faucets in the bathroom. He was, you know, he was just not having a good time. And so I said to them, I know it's a fast day for you, but is it also a fast day for your children? And they said, no. And I said, would it be okay if I took him and got him something to eat? And they said yes, and after that he was a different child. You know, it wasn't fair to expect a 3-year-old to fast all day. And also sometimes children are behavior issues, and you kind of need to know how to deal with that. Like I had some children who were in the bedrooms jumping on the beds in somebody's house. And I said, we don't, it's not a good thing for children to jump on the bed. And they said, well, my mom said it was okay. Oh dear, then what? It is not okay, especially to jump on somebody else's bed. And another one, there was a very long open staircase with a banister. You know what they were doing? Sliding down. And I said, it's too dangerous for you to do that. And my mom said it was okay. Well, that's difficult. It's very difficult. And the children get confused, to say the least. I would always say to take at least a second look at a property that you were thinking about buying, even an apartment, because you want to think about if you have furniture, will it fit? Because if you have some kind of furniture that is hard to deal with, let's say a piano. A piano can be really hard to get in a third floor apartment where there's no elevator. But that may be real important to you. Then you make an offer in writing with the help of either a realtor or an attorney. You never want to do this without the help of some professional because, again, it is a legal document. And once you sign it, you're on the hook. You just cannot say, well, I don't want to do that. Then you might be prepared to negotiate. They might say, well, I really wasn't going to leave the refrigerator, and you might say, well, I really need the refrigerator. I would do this if you would leave the refrigerator. Or they might say, if you pay this much more, we'll leave the refrigerator. Appliances are hard to move, and hard for people to move them in and hard for people to move them out. Then most people today have a home inspection with a certified licensed home inspector who has special training. That is something that didn't used to happen, but now it's extremely common and very important, I think. And then you usually go with them for part of that home inspection, so you learn the weird parts about that house, like maybe how the circuit breaker box, if it has any unusual things about it, or and if there are any definite flaws in the property that should be addressed. And then you have to deal with that again with the owner. And keep everybody apprised of your progress. Your lender needs to know what's going on. Your attorney or your realtor needs to know what's going on. And then you have to get homeowners insurance. And have any of you had tenants insurance where you're living in apartments? It's pretty reasonable. Homeowners insurance is not very reasonable. It will be probably at least 0.5% of what your house is worth. So if you pay $100,000 for a house, it would be at least $500. If it's $200,000, it would be at least $1,000. Significant. And you have to have that money up front. And then you go for it. If you ever think you might look for a house, I would keep this and just think about how you might modify it for your situation. But I also think you need to know the cost of housing in an area before you sign a contract for work, because it is a related factor. You can't pay for housing, then you don't want to go there. Or you may have to settle with sharing when you didn't really want to share. There are some real big things to consider. And then the third thing I gave you was the part about homeowners insurance, because I don't think most people even know what questions to ask. And I have worked with Habitat for Humanity and the new owners of those properties. And one of the things that Habitat requires is that they have the first year's homeowners insurance available before they move in. And some people say, I don't even know how to do that. Well, you look up who sells insurance, and then you start asking some of these questions. And again, the price you pay will be affected by the coverage you have. Like, I have earthquake insurance on my house. It's not very expensive, and I decided it was worth it, but not everybody does. But an earthquake is considered a natural disaster, and so it's pretty hard to get it fixed if you don't have some kind of insurance. And think about all the people who live in those flood areas, like on the East Coast where there was the hurricane, and New Orleans where there was a hurricane. That's a terrible situation.
No, I'm saying, in one of my classes, we just did a chapter on homeowners insurance, and it's a little surprising that if you live in an area that's at risk of earthquakes or at risk of flooding, a lot of places won't even allow you to purchase insurance for that, because it's almost like it's guaranteed to happen. So
That's right.
it's more
And you know, there's what they call the 100-year floodplain and the 500-year floodplain. And you, believe it or not, quite a bit of Charleston's in the floodplain. You know that little creaky thing that runs through town that you go over when you're on 6th Street and 4th Street? Everything on both sides of that's considered floodplain. So if somebody buys a house there, they have to pay for flood insurance. And it's significant. It can be as much as $300 a month extra. So I'd say forget that one. Yeah, you better put that toward a house and another place as for insurance, because it also means there's likely to be an issue. Not only do you have to pay for that insurance, but you're likely to have a flood. Now, maybe not very often, but there has been flooding up there in that area where we're talking about. So those are floodplain areas. And you have to get that information, and there has to be a flood insurance certification, whether or not you are in a floodplain, and whether or not it's the 100-year one or the 500-year one, and you know, whatever. And did we just have it, so are we likely to not have one for another 100 years? You know, it's based on very complex statistics, and I'm sure most of you now are in love with statistics. It's, you know. So that's, you usually have to have at least 80% of the value of the house, because they figure that the lot won't blow away or flood away or whatever. However, if you were in New Orleans, in some cases, it did go away. The whole thing went away, not just your house, but the ground it was on. So homeowners insurance is not inexpensive. So it is very important to be knowledgeable about it and think about what you need to do, and what every kind of insurance we can ever buy, life insurance, health insurance, car insurance, home insurance, we don't really want to collect on it. Insurance is not something you ever want to collect on, but it's helping you if you do have to. But you know, I had a student once, and when I was teaching consumer ed here, and she was a college student and really had to watch her money, and she had a child, and she said she had her child insured for $1 million. I said, well, I don't understand why you would want to pay money to insure your child. I think it would make better sense to insure yourself, so that if something happens to you, there's money for that child to be raised. And she said, but he's my most precious thing. I think she had in her head that if she had enough insurance, he wouldn't die or get sick. You know, it doesn't guarantee that at all. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with what kind of financial loss will you have if something bad happens. And just don't ever think that over-insuring your car or your house is going to make them not ever get in harm's way. They will. So insurance is a problem situation. You always want to know how much your personal property will be covered. Typically, for an insurance policy, if your house is insured for $100,000, your personal property is insured for at least $50,000, about half of it. That's typical. And that would be like your clothes, your computers, your furniture, all those things. And the good news is, if any of you live in an apartment and your parents have homeowners insurance, which they probably do, if you have a theft or something that happens to some of your personal property, generally their homeowners insurance will have some coverage of things away from home. So you always want to investigate that. Or if you have things stolen out of your car, sometimes that will be covered. They talk about a peril and a hazard, and those are the things that can happen: a flood, a theft, or whatever. And deductibles, you can save money by having a high dollar deductible. but that also means you gotta have a high dollar problem before it pays. Like, I have $1,000 deductible on my car because that helps lower my premium on my car insurance. But it also means that anything that happens to my car has to be greater than $1,000 before my insurance would pay. It's a hard decision to make, I think. The same thing's true about your homeowner's insurance. You can determine the amount of your deductible, and it affects your bill for insurance. These are the special things, you know, earthquake, flood. Do you need them? Well, it depends on where you live. An exclusion would be something that's not covered, and you want to read that pretty close too. Additional living expense means if something happens to your house, do you have living expense in a motel or something for a while? I don't know how some of those people who lost their property in the New Orleans area or the New Jersey area, I don't know what they did. I would imagine that some of them, it just changed their life completely because they couldn't go back ever. There just wasn't anything to go back to. And that's where sometimes the government steps in and helps a little bit. But you know, think about it. If your whole house was swept away with everything in it, you just can't fix it. Money just won't even quite do it. And what about other structures on your property, like a storage shed or whatever might be there? An inflation guard means as the price of homes goes up, will your home still be covered? And then there's almost always personal liability and medical coverage, but those are for the other people who come to your house, not for you. Say someone comes to your house and they fall down your front steps, so they sue you. Or your dog bites them, so they sue you. That's what this would come under. And how can you lower your premiums? Well, cover the least amount you feel safe with, increase your deductibles, and just ask your insurance agent how to help with that. And then this is the big question. Will my premium go up if I file a claim? Well, probably. And that's true about your car insurance and your home insurance. If you have a wreck or you have a problem in your house, probably next time, and they pay, probably next time, your insurance premium will go up. It's not exactly fair, but it's just how it is. So what kind of insurance experiences have you had, Annie?
I was just in a car accident where it wasn't my fault. And so this is the first time that I filed a claim on my own. And I ended up having to jump through a lot of hoops because I didn't want to file a claim because it wasn't my fault. So it worked out in the sense we both had the same insurance. And it was
That's good.
Yeah, it was really good.
If you're going to hit somebody, be sure it's the same, they have the same insurance company.
Yeah. So it was pretty easy because either way that insurance company was going to pay, you know. So they just filed a claim on their end, and so my premium didn't go up.
That's good.
And my deductible covered it. So, well, actually, he ended up paying for my car, so it worked out.
And you know,
this time.
sometimes even if the police are there, they say it's nobody's fault. And then that's a real problem because your insurance company is going to want to do a long, drawn-out investigation and try to make it somebody's fault because they don't want to pay.
Right.
And sometimes an accident is just an accident.
Right.
So, yeah. And if it's your fault, that's no fun either because then your insurance company is going to have to pay, and there will probably be medical payments to people who might be injured, and there may be other kinds of liability. Insurance is really a difficult thing to work with, I think, because you just never know if you really have enough insurance or if your company that you're with is going to be good at paying when you do have a problem. And after all, if they don't pay when you have a problem, you didn't need them. That's the whole bottom line. Because I think a lot of these questions about homeowners would be relevant to your car insurance as well. I also carry $1 million personal liability insurance that is called an umbrella policy. And the reason I carry that is partly because of I'm in the real estate business, and I just, I don't want to ever do something that somebody would think was my fault that was a big lawsuit. That personal liability umbrella insurance is not very expensive. I think mine is just a little over $100 a year for an extra $1 million worth of insurance. So that's always something to think about, especially if you're in any kind of role in a job where you think that someone might think you were at fault for something. At least it's $1 million, that could be covered for not a lot of money. Some insurance is much more expensive than that. So, do you have anything else you'd like to share that you've had experience with any of the things we've talked about? There's not a dumb question. I'm here to answer anything that you want to venture to ask. Have all of you purchased some kind of insurance already, or are you still on your parents' policies, or what? Yeah. You can usually be on your parents' policies up to age 26, isn't that true? And particularly if you're still a student. But it's not too soon to start figuring it out, because there will be a time when you have to get it on your own. And I think one of the most confusing things is when you get employed, they'll say, well, go to Human Resources and tell them what kind of insurance you want. Oh my goodness, you don't even know what to say, because that usually involves at least health insurance, sometimes life insurance, and you don't know very much about the terminology in life insurance or health insurance, but they want you to make a decision in a few minutes. So it's really good to become a little bit knowledgeable ahead of time, because in health insurance sometimes it's you have a choice between HMO, which means that everything will probably be paid for, but you have to go to their facilities. Or you might have a PPO, which means you can go wherever you want to, but you have an upfront copayment. There are just so many varieties of health insurance, and they'll say, okay, we've got these 6 kinds with these 6 companies. Which one do you want? Tell us right now. And you're just like, I don't know what to say. Yet it's a really important part of your employment. And sometimes they pay it for you. Sometimes they pay a portion of it for you. Sometimes you have advantage of being part of the group, but you pay for it. It's hard. It's really hard, because sometimes a decision has to be made quickly. And it's in place for at least a year. And sometimes you think, why did I do this? So the benefits in an employment situation are one of the most difficult things to sort out. Do you want a 401k? Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? And hospitals are going to have all those choices. Other industries are going to have all those choices. And maybe somebody's not going to have any of those choices, and so maybe you don't want to work there, because the benefit package is extremely important to you. Because usually the insurance through their program would be much less expensive than going out on your own and getting it. I seriously doubt that you'd ever be able to get automobile or homeowners insurance there, but life and health for sure. Absolutely for sure. So read up. I've had some students in the past that the darndest things got them their job. One girl was in merchandising, and we kind of role played ahead of time, some questions they might ask her, and also just general kinds of information. And one of the questions she said got her the job. Now this is like in merchandising for a large department store. Was what's 20% of 400? She said 80, and they said, you've got the job. Everybody else just about fell off their chair. See, you never know what they're going to ask. They want to know, can you think on your feet? Do you have a feel for numbers? Because on almost all jobs today, you have to know about numbers, some kind of numbers, and you don't have your calculator right there, you know. And another thing, she said, we practiced what she should wear, and we talked about her shoes and her clothes, and I said, okay, what are you going to wear if you get a callback interview? Because you probably don't want to wear the very same thing you wore for the first interview. And she said that she felt really confident about all that because we had talked about it. And sometimes people aren't very well prepared for that, you know, and you have to know what, I always say dress a little better than what you think you would on the job, because they want to know what you look like at your best. And when you are on the job, you may wear a simple uniform or a lab coat or something that you don't have to worry about. But they also may prefer that you wear black or navy blue pants as opposed to lime green. You know, you have to just think about what makes you look the very best you could look. And if you don't know the answer to the question, think of a way to answer them that's not a negative. It's hard. And then you got to deal with all this stuff too. You know, you've got the new job, you've got the new place to live, you've got it all. So, well, I hope this will help you when you get ready to roll. So you can, now will all of you be done at the end of this year, or do you have another year? So you're ready to go. Ready or not, here you come. Huh?
I'm 50-50 on it. Like, I'm super excited and like super scared at the same time. But
You know, you've been in school every year of your life for a long time, and now you're not going to be. It's a whole new dilemma with great big new decisions to make. So, well, good luck. Thanks for coming today.